Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the free 1-hour filmmaking training where I'm going to be revealing my top 10 secrets to creating professional cinematic videos. The filming and editing tips that I'll be teaching today are ones that my team and I have learned and applied over the past 8 years of experience that have led us to land big name clients like Hyundai, LG, Canon, Adobe, and many more. Also have helped us build a YouTube channel of over 1 million subscribers and has allowed us to travel all over the world. So whether you're a beginner, intermediate, or even a pro, we're confident that you'll walk away today with actionable steps that you can take immediately to improve your video skills and/or the marketing and advertising efforts in your own business. And make sure to watch till the end because after the 10 secrets, as a bonus, I'll be sharing my journey of how I got started and the 6 steps that I took to go from 0 to full time. And I'll also be offering an exclusive discount for you to join the full course if you're interested in learning more beyond just this free 1 hour. But without further ado, let's now dive into my top 10 secrets to creating professional cinematic videos. Okay, secret number 1 is buying the right gear. Or at least this used to be the first secret I would talk about in this 1-hour training, but I firmly believe that it's not the gear that makes the video great, but how you actually use the gear. So we're gonna talk about gear at the very end of this training in the Q&A, so stick around for that if you wanna hear all my gear recommendations. But let's jump straight into our next secret, which is the new number 1 secret, camera settings. No matter what camera you have, an iPhone, a DSLR, a RED, in order to achieve cinematic results, you're going to have to learn how to dial in your camera settings. So here's some of the most important settings to be aware of to achieve that professional cinematic look. First and foremost is to shoot at 24 frames per second. Trust me people, this is what they shoot Hollywood films at, and this is what your eye is used to seeing when it comes to high quality films. The reason is because it gives you a certain motion blur that is easy on the eyes and makes it feel more like a movie. A big rookie mistake is to shoot at 30 frames per second because it looks smoother, but when you shoot at 30 frames per second, it's gonna make it look more like a soap opera or news broadcast or a home video. There are some times that I do shoot higher frame rates, but that's when I plan on slowing it down to 24 frames in post. For example, if I shoot 60 frames, I would convert that to 24 frames in the editing room, and that's what creates slow motion. So 60 frames per second or higher when I know I'm gonna be creating slow motion in post, and I shoot 24 frames per second when I just want real time, and I know I won't be slowing it down in post. Your next important camera setting is picture profile. This completely depends on what brand of camera you use, and we have recommended picture profiles for different brands of cameras depending on the look you want. All that can be found inside the paid course, but since Canon cameras are most widely used and what I personally use most, here's a look at my preferred Canon picture profile that I shoot a lot of my video content in. I choose a standard profile with sharpness turned all the way down to 0, my contrast turned down 2 or 3, saturation at 0, and color tone at 0. These settings will give you beautiful, vibrant, straight out of camera colors that don't require much work in post. Maybe just add a little contrast, sometimes I'll throw on a LUT to give it a look, but that's about it. And we've actually built a custom Sony picture profile that matches this Canon color profile, but it's a bit more complex to set up. Again, full video on all these different profiles in the course. But that's the profile I use most because it requires very little time in post, so I can turn my videos around really quick, but there are times that I want more flexibility in post to create certain looks, and I want to preserve more dynamic range, like if I'm shooting high-end commercials or something. So in those situations, I'll usually shoot in flatter profiles like RAW or log. Personally though, I wouldn't recommend shooting in log if your camera only shoots 8-bit color depth, as that will be a lot harder to recover colors because there's not enough data to work with. So I only shoot in log if my camera can shoot at least 10-bit color depth, so check your camera to see if you can shoot in 10-bit before choosing to shoot in log, or else you may find that your image starts to fall apart in post as you try and bring back those colors. And we'll talk more about color grading in later tips, but point is, if you're new to color grading and or don't want to spend a lot of time in post, I recommend using the profile that looks good straight out of camera like the one I just showed you. But moving on now to our next setting is white balance. I highly discourage shooting anything in auto. Learn how to use your manual settings. We won't go into it too much in depth on this one, but as a rule of thumb, when you're outdoors with direct sunlight, you usually want to be between 5200 and 6000 Kelvin depending on the time of day. And if you're indoors using only artificial lighting, you usually want to be between about 3 and 4000 Kelvin depending on the lights in that room. But simply put, the main goal with setting your white balance is to make your whites look white. So find something in your image that's white and adjust your color temperature until those whites look white and not too cool or not too warm. Another auto setting to avoid is auto ISO. Here you see 3 photos, each with a different exposure. Oftentimes if you use auto ISO, it will either expose for the sky and underexpose everything else, or it will expose for the darkest part of your image and overexpose the sky. But if you manually expose, you can decide your exact exposure and choose somewhere in the middle to make sure your subject is exposed correctly. And when choosing your underexposure, use your histogram, which is this graph that reads the exposure of your image and tells you whether it's underexposed, which will put all the information over here on the left, or whether it's overexposed, which will put all of your information over here on the right. You want all of your information to sit somewhere in the middle and is spread out evenly throughout your histogram rather than bunched up on one of the two sides. Most rookies will tend to overexpose their image, so try and keep that info from hugging the right side of your histogram, and this will help your images from looking novice. Now, there's other more advanced tools we talk about in the course that you can use for nailing that exposure and getting skin tones at the right exposure, but that's an in-depth topic as well. Just know there's lots of tools you can use to help get the right exposure every time. But moving on to our last setting we'll talk about here is shutter speed. As a rule of thumb, you want to make sure your shutter speed is twice your frame rate, so when shooting in 24 frames per second, you'll want a shutter speed at 1/50th. This will give you the most natural motion blur that your eyes are used to seeing in real life. And we'll talk about aperture more in depth in another secret, but in order to get both your shutter speed and your aperture as low as possible, which will allow you to get that nice blurry background blur look, you'll need to use an ND filter or polarizer. I use an ND polarizer combo made by Polar Pro that costs around $200, and yes, I use Polar Pro filters for all my drones as well, but the reason I like polarizer NDs over just standard NDs is because polarizers cut down the sun's reflection, making colors pop more and giving the appearance of increased dynamic range as it softens the highlights from sun reflection. So when shooting outdoors, I'm often using my ND polarizers. But point is, learn how to use manual settings and exposure tools to achieve correctly exposed shots, as all of those settings combine to give your image a cinematic professional look. But let's move on now to cinematic secret number 2, which is lighting. Lighting is one of the most important elements to great cinematography and probably the least understood and least appreciated among beginners. Once you have your camera settings dialed in, I'd say the next step you should take when filming a scene is to make sure you have good lighting. Here's an example of how much an image can change just by changing the lighting. And one of the biggest reasons why the image on the right looks better is because my lighting in that image creates depth, which is a secret we'll talk about later. But here's a few reasons why the lighting in this image creates more depth. The first reason is the shadow on the face. I've positioned the light 45 degrees slightly above the subject so that it casts a drop shadow on the chin and cheek. This shadow makes the face look more three-dimensional, thus creating depth. It also creates what's called Rembrandt lighting, which is one of the most popular lighting patterns in Hollywood films, where you have this little triangle of light right below one of the eyes. Now, there's all kinds of lighting patterns that can be applied for different looks. We won't cover all of them here, but in the course we talk in depth about how to achieve different looks for different scenarios and when to use hard versus soft light and how to create those different qualities of light. But another reason why this image has more depth is because of color contrast. By lighting up my background blue, it contrasts my orange skin, which is on the opposite spectrum of the color wheel, thus making my face pop out more from the background, again creating depth. And lastly, the overall exposure of the image on my face is brighter than the lighting on the background. So by having contrast of exposures, again, it helps the subject stand out from the background, creating more depth. And a big rookie mistake I see is people having their backgrounds way brighter than the subject, which is fine if you're doing a silhouette shot, but otherwise, if you're trying to expose for your subject, then it will just make your image look blown out and amateur. Another common mistake I see is when people have the direction of light coming from an unflattering angle, causing weird shadows in weird places, making it super unflattering. So look out for those mistakes as well. Now, some of you are saying right now, well, I don't have money to buy any nice lights, so how can I create good lighting just using natural sunlight? Well, here's a few tips for you. Tip number 1 of shooting with natural light is the time of day. Typically, the best time of day to shoot is during golden hour. This is the first hour of light in the morning and the last hour of light at night. The reason it looks so good is that the light is lower in the sky, creating a much more flattering direction of light, versus if you were to shoot at noonday when the sun is high in the sky, that direction of light is much less flattering and the colors outside are less saturated. So I always try and schedule my shoots around golden hour. Another reason for shooting at golden hour is it allows you to use the sun as backlight, which is tip number 2, and that is camera direction. Personally, I love shooting into the sun because when you use the sun as your backlight, it gives you these beautiful sun flares coming in and out of your image, which is a super popular cinematic look. Using the sun as backlight also creates even lighting on your subject's face versus having your subject being lit directly by hard, harsh sunlight. In this example, the subject on the left has raccoon eyes because the sun is directly overhead and in front of them, so you see all these harsh shadows on the face and they're squinting because the sun's in their eyes, versus on the right, their eyes are wide open, there's no squinting, no harsh shadows on the face, just nice even light. So I highly recommend, especially when shooting people's faces, to shoot with the sun behind the subject. Now, ideally when you do this, you want to have a reflector to bounce some of that light back on your subject so that your background isn't too overexposed like we just talked about. And you can pick up a cheap reflector for like $20 off of of Amazon. But even if you don't have a reflector, there's a lot of good natural reflectors out there, like big white buildings or a sand beach or snow or windows. So when I'm shooting into the sun, I'm always looking for things that I can use around me to get some of that sun to reflect back on the subject to help light them up better so they aren't too much darker than the backlight. Now, there are times when I like to use the sun as a front light source. The main time is when I'm doing wide landscape shots. Here's an example of shooting a landscape on a cloudy day, and then the same shot but with the scene being front lit by the sun. Look how much more color it adds to have the sun out. So when doing landscapes, I like it to be super sunny. And in this case, that meant I had to wait around for a half hour for the weather to change to get a better shot. Which brings me to our third tip for shooting in natural light, and that is weather. If you can, try and wait for the sun to come out because it's going to help your images pop more. But if the clouds do come out, it's not always a bad thing. There are certain things that actually look better with clouds. For example, shooting weddings or people's faces are great on cloudy days because the clouds act as a giant diffuser, which softens the light and creates more flattering looks on people's faces. So figure out how to utilize different weather patterns to your advantage. If it's rainy or snowy, some people would put their camera away, but to me, that's the best time to get that epic slow motion shot because you have the rain or snow creating that awesome movement. So when you slow it down, it looks super epic. Again, we cover lighting in depth in the course, but needless to say, lighting is probably the single biggest factor that separates amateur looking films from professionals. As an example, check out this image that was shot by my buddy. I let him borrow my $8,000 C200 camera setup, and yet it still turned out super amateur looking despite the nice camera. So I went over to his studio, spent $300 on cheap lights and acoustic foam, set it all up, and here was the results. And the twist is, the after image was shot on a $600 SL2, just to prove that it's not the camera, but the skills behind the camera that make the image look professional, and lighting was a huge part of that. So take time to learn how to use lighting, folks. But moving on now to our third cinematic secret, composition. Now there's quite a few elements to good composition. We talked about one element already in lighting, and again, we have a whole video on this subject of composition, talking about dominant subjects, filling your frame, using the rule of thirds or symmetry or patterns or repetition and so on. But the main element of composition that I want to focus on in this training is depth. Creating depth is one of the most important things you can do to create a cinematic looking image. And there's a few tips I'll give you on how to create more depth in your image. The first and quickest way is to shoot at a low aperture. I often shoot a lot of my shots at 2.8 or lower, and the reason being, when you use a low aperture, it knocks the background out of focus and gives you a shallow depth of field, thus separating your subject from the background, creating depth. For example, take a look at this side by side. There's people in the background of both of these shots, but you can't tell in the shot on the left because the background is knocked out of focus. This helps your viewer focus on the subject and not get distracted by unimportant background details. Keep in mind though, using a lower aperture doesn't guarantee this look. You also have to make sure your subject is far removed from the background and that the camera is relatively close to the subject in relation to that background. And as you can see, this creates a lot more depth to the image. Now, depth can also be created by using foreground. So when I'm framing up a shot, I'm always looking for some foreground to put in front of my lens to make my image feel more three-dimensional. So look at this shot here. I have foreground on my right, I have my subject in the middle, and I have background blurred out in the back. These three layers help create depth to my image. Again, if I were just to shoot against a flat wall, there would be no depth. But if I simply position myself up against this wall and change the direction at which I'm shooting, it creates depth by adding foreground and background. So always look for opportunities to create more depth to your image. Another tip for creating depth is to look for leading lines. Find natural lines around you like bridges or fences or anything you can find that helps lead your eye to the center of the image is also going to help create depth and make those shots look more cinematic. Moving on now to cinematic secret number 4 is camera angles. One of the questions I get asked most is people unsure what camera angles to use and when, and how many angles they should cover when filming a scene. Again, we have a full video just on this topic, but in this video we're going to discuss 12 of the most commonly used camera angles used in Hollywood films, and they are as follows. You have your wide shot, which is great for establishing locations, your long full body, which is similar to the wide shot but usually on a tighter focal length and showing the full body, your medium shot, which is usually from the waist up, similar to what you're seeing right now, a cowboy shot, which is usually in between long and medium from around the knees up, a tight or close-up shot, which is usually just of the face, a detail or extreme close-up shot, which is usually super tight to show a specific detail, a low angle to show more power or dominance, a high angle to show vulnerability or weakness, a Dutch angle to make you feel like something's not quite right, the over the shoulder, which is commonly used to show dialogue is happening between two people, the POV shot to show the viewing perspective of your subject, common in action scenes, and the cutaway shot, which is basically used to take a break and cut away from the main action. Now, we're not going to go into too much detail here, but the idea is to use a variety of these camera angles so that when you go into the editing room, you have a lot of angles to choose from so that you can better tell your story in a way that helps the audience become fully immersed and feel like they are actually there. So how many of these angles should you use for any one scene? I'd say as many as time allows, but typically I like to live by something I call the 5-shot rule. So when I'm covering an important piece of action, I like to cover it from at least 5 different camera angles. Here's an example of a music video I shot for a local band, Foreign Figures. I started the video with a wide establishing shot to show off the location, then I cut to some tight shots of a different band member's face and instruments. I also mix in some medium shots of the waist up, some long full body shots here and there, and occasionally an extreme close-up to show off a specific detail, and I even did some drone shots to give a higher angle for a new perspective. I did about 20 takes total on this shoot, but made sure to cover those 20 takes from a variety of camera angles so that I had freedom and flexibility in the editing room to cut between different angles to give the viewer a much more dynamic viewing experience. And now to show you how important it is to shoot from a variety of camera angles, here's a short clip of my team member Jake walking into our office and beginning to work at his computer. This is what it looks like shot from one boring angle, and this is what you typically see from a beginner. And now here's that exact same clip shot from all 12 camera angles that we previously mentioned to show you how much more life it adds to your story when you use multiple camera angles. Check it out.
You gotta be kidding me!
As you can see, having multiple camera angles adds a variety of perspectives, making the story more engaging and helping the editor more easily edit together a compelling story. Now, it's not always better to shoot a lot of camera angles. Sometimes you want your story to feel slower paced, lonely, boring, or just like you're a fly on the wall. But I'd say most of the time, having multiple camera angles adds more life to your films. But moving on now to cinematic secret number 5, motivated camera movements. The biggest thing that separates my films from so many others is my ability to move the camera in a way that immerses the audience into the story. So I'm now going to share with you my top 10 gimbal movements and when I use them to help tell my story better. So without further ado, here are my 10 gimbal movements. So the first and most common movement that I use is called the push-in or dolly shot. This is when you just move straight forward. And I like to use this as an intro shot to a video to establish a location or show off a wide landscape, or great for real estate to mimic walking through a house. Basically, it's a great way to quickly add movement to any shot as a great alternative to just a static tripod shot. The second movement is the pull-out or reverse dolly, basically the opposite of the push-in, and is achieved by just moving straight back. I like to use pull-outs at the end of videos to help resolve the story and make my audience feel like they are leaving the scene, or I'll sometimes use it to reveal something later on in my shot. Move number 3 is the parallax. This is probably my favorite shot and the movement that I use most, and it's achieved by walking in one direction while panning my camera in the opposite direction. This makes it feel like your subject stays in the same spot while the background is moving behind them. This is a great way to help your audience focus in on the subject while adding that cinematic movement all around them. Move number 4 is the rise up, and this is when I bend my knees, start low, and then move straight up, ending as high as I can to mimic the move that a jib would make. And you can also tilt down while rising up to give a similar parallaxing effect. Move number 5 is the reveal. This is where I find something in my foreground to glide up against to reveal my subject in the background. And this is a great move to use for in-camera transitions to help your edits flow better. Move number 6 is the tilt down. This is where I have something interesting above me that I want to show off, and then I slowly tilt down to reveal my subject. I usually double this with a push-in move for more movement. And the opposite of that would be the tilt up, and this is done by starting with the camera facing on something below me and then slowly tilting up to reveal my subject. Number 7 is the change of focus. This is when I set my focus point close to my subject, then I'll scoot back and start my shot so that my subject is out of focus, and then push in until I hit that focus spot. This is another great way to reveal your subject by starting them out of focus and bringing them into focus, and here's a couple of times when I've done that. Move number 8 is the tracking shot. This includes lead tracking, follow tracking, side tracking. This is basically when you are maintaining the same distance from your subject by moving with them to keep them in the same spot in the frame the whole time. Tracking shots are a great alternative to just panning from a distance to help make your viewer feel like they are in the action. Move number 9 is transition moves. This is where I plan out beforehand 2 different shots that I will stitch together in post. Similar to the reveal shot we talked about, but more purposeful in shooting 2 shots with similar movements that I can stitch together in post, and usually includes passing by something in the foreground so you have something to cut off of, or shooting 2 shots with the exact same movement so that they flow together in the editing room. And I show in the course how to stitch these shots together in the editing room for that seamless transition look. And movement number 10 is low mode. This is where I turn the camera upside down or reverse my gimbal so that I can get as low to the ground as possible, giving my audience a different perspective and more of the hero shot look. So just a great way to mix it up and give new perspectives. So there you have my top 10 movements. If you can learn and apply these creative moves, it's going to add a lot of emotion and energy to your films. Another important note, one of the biggest rookie mistakes I see is people trying to use a lot of camera movement, but the movements are super shaky when they are meant to be smooth. Just because you have a gimbal doesn't guarantee smooth shots. You still have to learn how to actually use it properly. And here's 4 quick tips to make sure your gimbal shots are as smooth as possible. Number 1, make sure your gimbal is correctly balanced. And if it's motorized, make sure your settings aren't too stiff or too loose. This isn't super easy to do. It will take time to learn how to properly balance, but it is absolutely essential. Number 2, learning how to have soft hands for slow, controlled movements. I see too many people making quick, jerky movements, and again, this takes a lot of practice to develop that soft touch. Number 3 is lens choice. The wider the lens, the more it will hide any imperfections in your movements, so starting out with a wider lens is usually better for beginners. And number 4 is bend your knees to act as shocks to absorb the up and down movements of your footsteps. Again, we cover these 4 keys to getting smooth shots more in depth in the course. We talk more about how to balance the glide cam perfectly and how to balance motorized gimbals. Plus, we give you our favorite gimbal settings, but hopefully that at least gives you an idea of what to focus on to improve the smoothness of your shots so that you can incorporate clean, steady movements into your videos. Moving on now to cinematic secret number 6 is perspective or lens choice. Which lens should you use and when? Now, this is a topic that took me years to understand, and I was honestly just guessing for a long time. So what I'm about to tell you will save you years of guessing if you pay attention. First, let's talk about zoom lenses, then we'll talk about prime lenses right after. Of my zoom lenses, my favorite lens to use on a full frame camera is my 16 to 35 millimeter wide angle. Wide angle lenses are great for things like landscapes because the wide field of view allows you to see more of your surrounding scenery. They're also great for shooting real estate or architecture, as it makes the house or building look much bigger than it really is. Or when I'm shooting action adventure type stuff, I want to get really close to the action while still being able to see my full subject in the frame. But times that I don't use 16mm is when I'm doing a close-up of the human face. As you can see, it distorts all the facial features and isn't very flattering. It's been said that between 70 and 100mm is the most flattering focal length for the human face. So when I'm shooting something like a wedding or portraits, I always pop on my standard lens, the 24 to 70mm, and this allows me to zoom into 70 when I'm shooting tights of people's faces, but I still have the flexibility to get pretty wide by zooming out to 24mm to get that wide group shot of the entire family. So the 24 to 70 is probably going to be your most versatile all-purpose lens for shooting things like live events. Now my 70 to 200 lens is probably my least used lens of my zooms. The main times I use it is when I can't physically get any closer to my subject, like when I'm filming live workshops or concerts or a marriage ceremony where you are unable to get closer to the action, so you have to set up a tripod from far away and just zoom in. As for my prime lenses, I love Sigma Art primes because they're a lot cheaper than Canon glass, but still deliver similar optical quality. And the Sigma primes that I own are the 20mm, 24, 35, 50, and 85. I do also own a Liowa 12mm for those really wide shots and a Liowa probe lens for unique product shots, but those are more of specialty lenses. But all of my Sigma Art lenses are a 1.4 aperture, which means I can get even more shallow depth of field, and they allow me to shoot in lower light situations. So if you want more background blur and find yourself shooting in a lot of low light situations, then those are the times to choose prime lenses over zooms. Also, prime lenses typically have better overall sharpness and image quality. The downside to primes, however, is they can't zoom, so you don't have as much versatility and flexibility to get a variety of focal lengths without having to carry around several lenses and constantly be swapping them out and potentially missing out on some of the shots. But hopefully those are some good tips for you to help you know my favorite lenses and the times I use them. Moving on now to cinematic secret number 7 is focus while moving. Everything could be perfect about your shot, but if it's out of focus, it's not usable. And one of the biggest challenges I see rookies run into is figuring out how to keep subjects in focus while moving. So here's my 4 main tips for staying in focus. Number 1, get a camera with really good autofocus, like the Canon's dual pixel autofocus system. Sony also has really good autofocus, but those are probably the only 2 manufacturers whose autofocus systems I trust right now, but others are getting better over the years. And I probably use autofocus 80% of the time on my shoots because the technology is just that good. But when I'm using cameras like I am now with my Red camera that doesn't have autofocus, here's some tips to use manual focus. Tip number 2 is to set your focus on your subject, then maintain that same distance from the subject throughout the whole shot, like I'm doing right now. If you need to change distance, then you'll have to refocus to that new distance. Tip number 3, for a more handheld look, I will either shoot handheld or hold the shaft of my glide cam and change focus as I move closer or farther from the subject. If you use something like a Crane 2 or Ronin S, it has a focus wheel that allows you to rack that focus manually continuously as you're moving around. And tip number 4 is to use a high aperture like between 16 and 20 so that everything is in focus. I mentioned that I usually try and shoot everything at a lower aperture like around 2.8, but when I'm filming wider shots like landscapes, when I want all of my image to be in focus, then I'll bump up my aperture much higher so that everything in the frame is in focus. This will give you a lot more leeway to move closer or farther from your subject while still keeping them in focus. And for those last 3 manual focus tips, I highly recommend turning on focus peaking on your camera. If your camera doesn't have focus peaking, then you may need to buy an external monitor that does have it. And typically the bigger the monitor, the better, so I usually have a 7-inch monitor like a small HD Focus 7 so that I can see it easier, which will increase my chances of nailing that focus every time. So there you have a few tips on keeping your subject in focus while moving. Moving on though to secret number 8 to creating professional cinematic videos, the audio. I always say that audio is half of the viewing experience. What people hear creates half of the emotion. And yet audio is probably the most neglected part of filmmaking by rookies. So here's a few tips to enhance the audio experience of your films. First off, when capturing audio, whether it's a sound effect or dialogue of someone speaking, the biggest mistake I see rookies make is the microphone is just too far away from the subject, or they're just not using a microphone and just using the internal camera microphone. A healthy distance that you want to aim for is having your mic 6 to 14 inches away from the subject. And here's an example so you can see the difference distance makes in the quality of audio captured.
This is me talking with the mic 1 foot away from my mouth. This is me talking with the mic 3 feet away from my mouth. This is me talking with the mic 5 feet away from my mouth. And this is me talking with the mic 10 feet away from my mouth.
And when recording, you want to make sure the audio levels on average are sitting between -18 and -6 decibels. Again, we have tutorials in the course showing you how to set up different microphones, but whatever mic you have, take the time to get your audio levels set correctly and place the mic at an appropriate distance from the subject. Once good audio is captured, the next step is mixing it in post and selecting some complementary music or sound effects to help add to the story. Personally, I think music is huge. Why would you spend a full day or sometimes weeks shooting amazing visuals and put 0 time and effort into selecting quality, amazing audio to accompany it? Don't just pick the first song that you find, dig deep and listen to a lot of different tracks, play them alongside your footage, and ask yourself, does this song help add to the emotion of the footage or does it distract or compete with the visuals? And keep searching until you find one that brings out the emotion you're hoping for. And the main sites I get my music from are as follows: premiumbeat.com, MusicBed, Soundstripe, Artlist, and Audio Jungle. Usually from one of those 5 sites I can find a song to license that fits my footage, and I actually worked out a deal with Soundstripe to give 20% off their services, so all full-time filmmaker members get unlimited licensing for around $100 a year. And I've also worked out deals with other sites as well. But once you get your music picked out, another rookie mistake I see is people editing their footage to just music and not having any sound effects. To show you how important this is, take a listen to one of my edits with and without sound effects. Now, some of those sounds were captured while I was shooting, and I try and capture as many clean sound effects as I can while on location, but a lot of the audio was captured or added in post, and that's called sound design or sound mixing, when you add more sounds on top of the existing audio to beef it up. If you look at my project file, you see that sometimes I have 6 or 7 or even more layers of audio that all combine to make the audio more full. And in the paid course, we actually include over 100 of our most common sound effects that we use to help our students start building a library of sound effects. And I also provide a link where you can download a huge library of thousands of quality sound effects for free as well. But point is, audio is huge, don't neglect it. Now, let's assume you followed all these first 8 secrets that I've just taught you. You should have some pretty cinematic looking images by now. But there's more to great videos or films than just what the image looks like or sounds like. You also need to know how to tell a story with those beautiful images. So secret number 9 is storytelling. People always ask me for tips on telling a great story. They tell me that my videos make them feel so happy or motivated or inspired, and ultimately that's the number one goal of storytelling, to create emotion. And you'll know that you succeeded at telling a story if you can successfully evoke a certain emotional response from your audience. And depending on what type of story you're telling will depend on the emotion you're trying to create. For a wedding video, you probably want to create an emotion of love and happiness and joy. For a travel video, you probably want your viewers to feel inspired, motivated, entertained. For a real estate video, you probably want to create an inviting, luxurious, peaceful, comfortable feeling. So determine before you start a project what emotion you want to evoke. And this will be your foundation for your story that will help shape the way you shoot, what movements you use, what music you use, what angles you shoot from, which will then help you tell a better story when editing in post. And because I believe that half the storytelling takes place in the editing room, it is crucial that you learn how to shoot to edit. What that means is have a vision of what your final video is going to look like and the emotions you want to create with that final video, so that while you're shooting, you are making sure that every shot and every movement is motivated by the end story you're trying to tell and the emotions you're trying to create. If you're trying to create an emotion of fear, you're probably going to use a shaky, frantic, handheld camera look. If you're trying to create an emotion of peace and serenity, then you're probably going to want to use slow, smooth moving shots. If you want to create an emotion of adrenaline, you probably want to use fast-paced camera movements and quicker cuts. But a problem I see often with many filmmakers is they don't have a clear vision in their mind of what the final video is going to look like, so they don't have a purpose for every shot they're getting. They're just shooting to have footage, and I guess we'll figure it out in the editing room. And though a lot can be done in the editing room to create a story out of nothing, I promise your final videos will turn out much better if you're shooting every shot, every angle, every movement with your edit in mind. So take some time to visualize your end product and the emotions you want to convey before you start shooting. But like I said, shooting the footage is only half of the storytelling. The other half is done in the editing room. Which brings me to the second half of storytelling and our last and final secret, secret number 10, and that is the editing. A lot of people don't realize that half of the cinematicness of my videos happens in the editing room. I can take average footage and make it look great, and I can take great footage and make it look amazing, simply because of my editing skills. And the editing software that I use is Adobe Premiere Pro, and Adobe actually uses my footage that I shot in Guatemala as their demo footage when you first open the app, so that's kind of cool. But in the course, I actually teach from both Premiere and Final Cut Pro X, so it doesn't matter which one you use, the course teaches both. And just FYI, one of the great perks of joining Full-Time Filmmaker is that all members get the Adobe Creative Cloud student discount, which will save you upwards of $360 a year in software expenses. So that perk alone will cover the cost of joining the course in just a couple of years. But I now want to give you a few editing tips to help you tell more engaging cinematic stories that evoke emotion. Tip number 1 is shot selection. I will often use less than 5% of all the footage I shot in my final video. Because I shoot to edit, I make sure to get plenty of angles, several takes if possible, using different focal lengths and different camera movement styles so that I have options in the editing room. But just because I shot the footage doesn't mean I have to use it. Only take the best of the best. If you have 2 shots that are very similar, determine which one helps tell your story better and delete the other one. I see too many videos full of average or repetitive footage. Every shot I put in a video has purpose. Don't use clips just because you shot them or just to make your video longer. If you don't love it, omit it. Editing tip number 2 is to use appropriate cuts and transitions. Again, one of the biggest rookie mistakes I see is people overusing the same preset transition over and over again, or making jarring cuts that don't flow together, leaving the audience feeling confused as to what's going on. Again, I have a full video on this topic, but basically I break down 12 of the most used cuts and transitions in Hollywood films, and they are as follows. Number 1 is the clean cut or hard cut, which is just a basic cut, but when making basic cuts, make sure to use the 30-degree rule, which states that you should use a different camera angle by at least 30 degrees and or a different different focal length to help separate those two cuts from feeling like a jump cut, which is cut number 2, which when used purposefully can show the passing of time, but when used accidentally just feels jarring and confusing. Cut number 3 is the L cut, which basically means you have the audio from clip 1 carrying over into clip 2, which is commonly used in dialogue scenes. Cut number 4 is the opposite of the L cut, it's the J cut. Same thing, using the audio from clip 2, cuts back into clip 1 to help ease your audience into the next clip. Cut number 5 is cutting on action, like punches or someone running past camera or slamming a door or splashing in water. Cut number 6 is cross-cutting, where you cut back and forth between two pieces of action that are taking place at the same time. Cut number 7 is the cutaway, which means that you cut away from your main action to a different piece of action. Cut number 8 is the match cut, which means you cut two clips together that have similar framing or similar camera movements. Cut number 9 is the smash cut, which means you cut from something loud and intense to something calm and quiet, or vice versa. Cut number 10 is the crossfade, which means you fade between two clips, usually used in slower paced videos. Don't overuse this one, big rookie mistake to use a bunch of crossfades for no reason. Cut number 11 is the camera movement cut. This is a trendy seamless transition that is becoming super popular and is achieved by whipping the camera in one direction at the end of clip A and starting clip B, whipping the camera in the same direction, and then cutting them together in post and letting the motion blur seamlessly transition them together. And cut number 12, similar to the camera movement cut, is the invisible cut, which usually uses an all black frame, all white frame, or something passing in front of the camera in the foreground to hide the cut, again making it appear like one continuous shot. Now I realize those are a lot of cuts and transitions to take in all at once. Again, we have a full video covering these in depth, but I wanted to quickly name all of those off so you can have all of those in mind and not make the rookie mistake that a lot of people make, which is throwing together just transition presets or crossfading between every clip. Now you will have a wide variety of cuts and transitions you can use to mix up your edits and make them feel more professional. But moving on now to our third and last editing tip, color grading. Without going too in depth about color theory, know that using different color grades can manipulate your footage to convey certain emotions. For example, warmer tones usually convey happier, lighter emotions and will be seen in movies like romances. Cooler tones usually convey more dramatic emotions and will oftentimes be seen in thrillers or horror films. Desaturated colors convey dead, lifeless emotions and are often used for apocalyptic films. Vibrant, saturated colors convey a feeling full of life and are used in films like comedies or more lighthearted, upbeat films. And for pretty much every type of film, you'll usually see a good amount of orange and teal being used to give you that epic blockbuster Hollywood look. This can easily be overdone though, so be careful with it. I personally do like to use a subtle orange and teal LUT on most of my footage, and I actually teamed up with Lutify Me to create my own LUT that is included in the course, and I also provide links to where you can download other popular awesome orange and teal LUTs as well. But just to give you an idea of my general color grading process, I'm going to now show you how to create that orange and teal look without using a LUT. So here I have a clip that I shot on a smartphone just to show you that it doesn't matter how nice of a camera you shoot on, you can still create some great looks in post. My first step would be to come into Lumetri Color in Premiere Pro. For this image specifically, I'm going to warm it up a little since it was shot at golden hour and I want to give it that golden hour look. Next, I'm going to bring up the exposure just a tad as it's a little bit dark. You notice that it kind of blew out my highlights over here a little, so I'm going to come back into the highlight slider and just bring some of those highlights back. Then because my subject is a little bit underexposed, I'm going to bring up my shadows a tad, and I'll usually add a touch of saturation as well. Then I'll come down to my curves tab, add an S curve. It's called S curve because it's shaped like an S. Basically what it does is it gives you some more contrast to your image and gives it a little pop. And up to this point, this is a basic color correction. Now is when you give it more of a stylized look by either adding a LUT, or in this case, we're going to come down here to hue versus hue and just bring up everything but the skin tones to make our blues more teal and all of the colors like yellow and green become more orange. Then I'd come up to the hue versus saturation, just bring down my teal saturation a tad, and then my hue versus luma will come here to the yellows and oranges and bring back some of that blown out sky. So there you have it. That's pretty much all the tools I use on 90% of my color grades, and that's how you can achieve the orange and teal look without using a LUT. Obviously, every clip is different, so you can't do the exact same thing to every clip, but that should at least give you a good idea of my color grading process in general. Again, we have over 40 videos in the course just about my editing workflow and several videos on coloring different types of footage, but hopefully that gives you guys some good tips about the key elements to editing cinematic videos and telling compelling stories. But there you have it, folks. That wraps up my 10 secrets to creating cinematic videos. Next, I want to shift gears and talk more about the business side of video and share with you the 6 steps that I took to build a successful video business. One of the most frequently asked questions I get is, how did I get started and how did I scale my business to where it's at today? Now let's rewind 8 years ago when I was just 22 years old. I was in college, had had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. I had zero filmmaking education, zero experience, and I didn't even own a camera at this time of my life. What was I doing? I was knocking doors, selling DirecTV in the hot weather of Texas, absolutely hating my job. I dreaded waking up every morning and going to work, but I needed the money, and I think that's where a lot of people are at in life, especially people who are in college or high school, trying to figure out how to get by financially while also trying to figure out what they really want to do for a career. And one night, after a long day of knocking doors, I came across a quote by Steve Jobs that inspired me to change my life. It reads, "Your work is going to fill a large part of your life, and the only way to be truly satisfied is to do what you believe is great work. And the only way to do great work is to love what you do. If you haven't found it yet, keep looking, don't settle." Now, I was currently settling for a job that I didn't love, so I made a commitment right then and there that I wasn't going to do something I hated just to make money, but rather I was going to find something that I truly loved doing so that I could achieve great work in my lifetime. So I quit my job the next day and I started searching for my real passion. That's when I came across a video on YouTube by a guy named Devin Supertramp, and I immediately fell in love with what he was doing, and I decided that is what I wanted to do with my life. So I dove in headfirst, spent my life savings on buying my first camera setup, which was a used T3i, a Tokina 11 to 16 millimeter lens, and a Glidecam HD 2000, totaling $1,300, which for me at the time was a lot of money, but this is the first of my 6 steps to being successful, and that is being willing to invest in yourself. You need to be willing to invest in professional gear if you want to be paid as a professional. So my advice is don't be too cheap. Buy quality gear that will deliver quality footage. And again, I'll give you my recommendations for gear that I think will help you get by in different price ranges. We'll talk about that in the Q&A at the end. But the point is, be willing to take risks. It's kind of like paying for an education. Be willing to invest in your future. I can't emphasize that enough. But as soon as my fancy new gear arrived, I realized that I had no idea how to use it. And so I spent the rest of the summer watching frustrating YouTube tutorials trying to teach myself how to do everything. I'm sure a lot of you have been in the same boat where you spend an hour looking for a tutorial, you finally find one that looks promising, but it's 20 minutes long and you're lucky if you get 30 seconds of useful information out of it. Huge waste of time. I know how it goes, and that's actually a huge reason why I built Full-Time Filmmaker, is because I wanted to give people an alternative to the traditional film school, which is going to cost you hundreds of thousands of dollars, and an alternative to spending months or years of your life watching YouTube tutorials and learning from your own mistakes. I know because I took the YouTube route, and I could have learned everything 10 times faster had I had what I've built with Full-Time Filmmaker. But whether you go to film school, watch YouTube tutorials, or join Full-Time Filmmaker, or all three, the second step to being successful is mastering your skills. What separates you from other filmmakers out there? No one's going to hire you over someone else if their videos are better than yours. Now, this is going to take time. If you go to film school, it will take 4 years. If you go to the YouTube route like me, it will still take several years. And some of our Full-Time Filmmaker students have been able to go from rookie to expert in a matter of months, but more realistically, will still take a year or two. But the point is, it is going to take time to develop your skills, and during that process of development, you're going to have to learn how to fake it till you make it. This is an important principle I teach all the time. No one masters their skills overnight. They do it by attempting things that make them uncomfortable, by doing things they don't know how to do yet. An example of this was my first event I ever shot. A couple months after buying my first camera setup, I was at a paint dance at my local university, and while dancing with my friends, I noticed that nobody was filming the event, and I immediately recognized it as an opportunity to pose myself as the professional filmmaker on campus. So I ran back to my car, grabbed my camera gear, jumped over the fence, and hopped on stage and just pretended that I knew what I was doing and that I was the one who was hired to film the event. And I just started faking it till I made it. I didn't feel confident, but I acted confident, and pretty soon everyone there thought I was the film guy hired to film the event. I then took that footage home, pulled an all-nighter editing together a video, posted it on YouTube the next day, and everyone in the school started sharing it like crazy. Everyone saw that video, including the administration, who pulled me into their office and said, "We loved this video you just made and would like to offer you a scholarship to film the rest of our events for the rest of the year." And I was like, yeah, of course I'll take a scholarship. And just like that, I went from not knowing anything about filmmaking to becoming the director of cinematography at Southern Utah University. And all of a sudden, all these new doors started opening up, new clients came pouring in, and this leads me to step number 3, and that is to build a portfolio. This is huge. You need to have demo videos to show clients in order for them to trust that you can pull off a certain level of quality. I landed a scholarship based off of that one paint dance video. which led me to film more events, and those events led the gymnastics coach to see my work and hire me to film their meets, which led someone else to see those videos and hire me for something else. The best way to get work is to create work. You need to build a portfolio of videos in order to get noticed. And many ask me at this point, well, what should I film? And I always say, film whatever you want to get hired for. If you want to film weddings, then go film a few free weddings so that you have a portfolio to show engaged couples so that you can land some wedding gigs. And this leads me to step number 4, and that is to market yourself. Even if you don't feel confident in your skill level yet, you have to put your work out there. Post your work on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, send out emails to businesses, create a website. The more eyeballs that see your work, the greater the likelihood that someone with a video need will see that work and want to hire you. Without fail, every time I post a new video on social media, I get more jobs. I don't even advertise myself as a wedding videographer, but because of one wedding video that I posted on YouTube, I've gotten 1 to 2 wedding video inquiries every week for the past 2 or 3 years. So always share your work. And again, I talk more in depth in the program about SEO strategies on how to share videos most effectively to increase total viewership on different platforms and to also build a following. But moving on to step number 5, build relationships. A huge part of my success was finding mentors and building a relationship with guys like Devin Graham and his circle of influence. You've all heard that it's not what you know, it's who you know, and that is absolutely true. One of the biggest objections I get about full-time filmmaker is, why would I buy this course if I can just watch free YouTube tutorials? And my answer, in short, is you can only learn so much on YouTube for free before you have to level up and get into the courses, the mentors, the cheat codes of real life that can take you to the next level. In an oversaturated market full of average YouTube tutorial watching videographers, what are you doing to separate yourself from the crowd? You can indeed just watch YouTube tutorials for the rest of your life, but don't complain when your success is equivalent to everyone else watching YouTube videos. If you want to fast track your way to expert status and stand out from the crowd of average Joes, then you gotta do something different from all the other YouTube watching average Joes. You gotta step up to the next level and find yourself mentors, training courses, build connections and relationships with people who are more successful than you. I chose to surround myself with successful people and latch on to mentors and pay for courses from experts, and that's when my career really started to take off. YouTube was a great starting ground, but I never would have made it to where I am today had I not invested time and money into connecting to people that were on a higher level of success than me. And that's what full-time filmmaker aims to do, is give you access to me and thousands of other successful filmmakers so that you can build relationships, learn from mentors, and shorten your learning curve so that you can stand out as an expert in a sea full of average filmmakers. And just a couple examples of some of our FTF members who have applied this principle of building relationships. One of our members networked his way to being a part of Will Smith's YouTube channel, Film Crew. Another networked his way to shooting social media content for the MLB and being on the field shooting the big moments during the World Series. And I personally got hired to edit several videos for Imagine Dragons simply because I built a relationship with Dan Reynolds' assistant who showed the band some of my edits, which led them to hiring me. So networking to the right people is a huge part of landing jobs, and in our private community, you'll have a lot of opportunities to do just that. But one of the biggest keys to building these types of relationships is our last and final step, number 6, and that is to add value first. When you do approach people in higher places than you, do not approach them with the attitude of, hey, I need help from you. You have to add value first. Think about what you can do to add value to the person you are approaching and offer your help to them. And over time, that value always gets returned tenfold. One way I do this is by applying a principle I call free to fee. In other words, be willing to work for free before you charge a fee. An example of this was a couple of years ago, I shot an iPhone versus Red video on my own dime, in my own time, posted it on YouTube, and a year later, LG saw it and asked if I'd make a similar video for their new LG V30 smartphone and gave me a $40,000 budget to do so. Same thing happened a year later. I shot another video with my own money in Hawaii showing off the new iPhone XS, and a couple months later, Huawei saw that video and asked if they could hire me with a similar huge budget to promote their new P30 Pro that was soon to come out. So the way that I've been able to attract some of my biggest name clients is by creating my own content for free, then putting it on social media and having companies see those and then wanting to pay me big budgets to do something similar for their products. So be willing to do free passion projects to build your portfolio to attract the types of clients that you want to work for. And I'll usually get a handful of you saying at this point, oh, you should never work for free because then you'll just be expected to work for free forever. That, my friends, is the problem with most creative minds. Artists usually aren't the most business savvy people, but business skills can be learned. If you learn how to communicate communicate, negotiate, set clear expectations, correctly set prices for your work without undervaluing your services or overvaluing them and losing the job, then you'll be able to make a good living making videos. And again, we go over this in depth in the course, teaching you how to set prices for work by using a series of questions to ask your clients to ensure that you get paid what you're worth. But there you have the 6 steps that I took to build my video business, and that's how I've gone from a struggling artist to now making a great living doing what I love. And I know these steps may sound oversimplified, but I dare you to apply them and see what happens. I frequently see members in our group posting success stories about how they finally tried the free to fee method and landed a high-paying job. These principles do actually work and have allowed me and many of my students to make better livings doing what we love. And the coolest part is, because I can now charge so much more per project, it has freed up my time to help other people improve their video skills as well. Because as I started finding a lot of success building a large social media following, I was constantly being asked questions by my followers about my filmmaking process, and people wanted to learn how to break into this industry. So one day I sent out a post asking all my followers what they wanted to learn from me, and I got about 200 questions back. I then took every single question and organized them chronologically from beginning to end, everything one would need to know about how to become a professional filmmaker, even if they were a complete beginner. And then I took all those questions, scripted over 100 pages of organized answers. I basically wrote a book, researching and making sure I was answering all these questions correctly and concisely. I then took that 100-page script of answers and spent the next 6 months filming and editing training videos into what is now full-time filmmaker, over 400 organized training videos, taking you from beginning to end, what equipment to buy, how to use it, how to get those cinematic shots, my full editing workflow in both Premiere and Final Cut, all the way to landing and keeping clients and growing your own business. Currently over 80 hours of content and growing as our team of professionals continues to add more training videos every week to keep the learning relevant and up to date. And we actually built mini courses focusing on specific industries that we do sell individually as smaller courses, but they are included in the full package so that you can learn how to shoot anything from high-end luxury real estate videos, wedding videos, live events and concerts, music videos, action sports videos, commercials, travel and tourism, stock footage, YouTube branded sponsorship videos, tutorials, online courses, documentaries, independent films, you name it, we teach it. Needless to say, I think we have one of the most diverse yet concise curriculums out there, and our members are raving about this program all the time, and you can read about some of their success stories below this video. But aside from the 300 plus video curriculum, we also have some super valuable bonuses that we include in the memberships as well. As I mentioned, building relationships being a big part of my success, my team and I, along with our community of over 15,000, will act as mentors to help you improve your video skills faster and make connections quicker. In our private Facebook community, my team and I are always active on there answering questions, and the group is even more active than us, giving support, feedback, and troubleshooting issues. This Facebook group is also where our team will do Feedback Fridays, where every month we'll break down an individual's video, tell them exactly what they need to improve upon, and share it with the group so everyone can learn from each other's mistakes. We also do weekly live Q&A sessions where we just sit down and answer any questions you have and interact with you on an individual level. So a lot of personal access to practicing professionals unlike any program I've seen. And as another bonus, we also hold regular video contests where the winner takes home $500 cash prize. Some contests are sponsored by brands where we have even bigger cash prizes, like our music bed contest we just did, where the winner took home $1,000 for making the best commercial. So a lot of great opportunities in the program to push yourself creatively and learn from other student styles and creativity as well. Also, as another bonus, my team occasionally allows in-person job shadowers or meetups in our shoots where we share our shoot schedule on the Facebook group, telling everyone where we're going to be filming and when, and we invite any members to come out and learn from us on set to see how we operate in person. And for those who can't make it to the in-person job shadows, we also have one of the shadowers film behind the scenes, and later we post a virtual job shadow so that everyone can benefit from the job shadows. And we currently have over 50 job shadow videos and counting. And as even more bonuses, I'm also throwing in a full list of my top cinematic music artists that I use, a full library of 100 of our most used sound effects, and a link where you can download thousands more quality sound effects for free. Also throwing in our custom-made orange and teal LUT that we use on most of our videos, our Premiere Pro Smooth Zoom transition presets, my keyboard shortcuts, raw footage from several of our shoots with corresponding Premiere Pro project files so you can dive in deep to our workflow, and we even provide release waiver forms, invoice templates, client contract templates, and more to assist you in running your business. And on top of all the training content and bonuses, we also provide exclusive discounts on popular gear and software, such as 60% off the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite, 50% off Red Giant software like Pluralize or Colorista, 10% off refurbished glide cams, Rhino sliders, Westcott lights, 20% off Soundstripe memberships, 2 free months at Artlist. We also have some internal contacts to help you get discounts on G Technology hard drives and even some Apple products. And we recently teamed up with Adorama to offer you big savings on select high-ticket camera items such as $500 off the 1DX Mark II, $234 off a Canon EOS R, over $100 off the DJI Ronin S Essentials kit, $200 off a Sigma Art 50mm lens, and $100 off a Canon 24-70, just to name a few. And lastly, I also offer 40% off my other course, Course Creator Pro, that teaches people how to build, market, and sell digital products like online courses and how to run successful Facebook and YouTube ads. So there it is. That's what Full-Time Filmmaker includes. Again, you can buy the workshops individually, or you can get access to all of them with a premium membership that will give you immediate and lifetime access to everything, and you can watch at your own pace from either your phone or your computer. As for the price, our lifetime premium memberships are valued by our own members as being more valuable than years at film school, which can cost upwards of $10,000. But our lifetime membership sells for just $997, or about the price of taking one college class. But as promised, we are offering an exclusive discount for signing up for this training so that you can join today for 40% off at just $597. And to take advantage of this deal, just scroll down, click the Join Now button, where you'll be taken to this landing page, hit the Buy Now button, and you'll see the discount already factored into the price at checkout. And because we're so confident in the value of this course, we have a 30-day full refund money-back guarantee. So if you don't end up finding the course valuable, then we don't want your money. On average, only 3% of our buyers take that option. So we have a 97% customer satisfaction rate. So we're pretty confident the chances are high that you will love it as well. So make sure to take advantage of this offer if you're ready to level up your filmmaking skills. And if you have any questions or doubts about joining, we're super accessible. We pride ourselves on quality customer service. So shoot us an email at support@fulltimefilmmaker.com with any questions. But before you email us with your questions, I want to answer a few of our most commonly asked questions right now that you probably have at this point that will save us both time by listening to these Q&As. For our first question, let's circle back to one of the most frequently asked questions I get, and that is, what camera should I buy? My answer to this is always, well, it depends on what you're going to be shooting and what your budget is. But to give you a general idea, here's a few of my top recommendations in different price ranges. First budget range, $0. If you don't have any money to invest in gear, then just use your smartphone. Most smartphones nowadays can give you high quality 4K video that can be used professionally in some cases. If you don't believe me, check out my iPhone versus Red or LG V30 versus Red videos on YouTube, where I show that phones can achieve similar results to that of a $50,000 cinema camera if you know how to use it. Now for best results, I do recommend using a manual camera app like Filmar Pro, which you can get for around $15. But I've also filmed entire videos using all the auto settings like on my Huawei video. But in order to take your production value to the next level and get smooth moving shots, I'd recommend using a stabilizer, and the one I use and recommend for phones is the FreeFly Movi, which sells for $300, or you can get a cheaper one that isn't quite as great like the DJI Osmo Mobile 3 that you can pick up for around $100 that will give you pretty similar results. Moving into our next price range, for just $600 you can get a beginner mirrorless or DSLR and kit lens, and the beginner camera that I'd recommend is the Canon SL3 or a Canon M50. I shot a short film recently using a Canon SL2 handheld in order to prove that you can get great results with cheap gear, again, if you know how to use it. Now, of course, there are other great beginner options like the Panasonic G7, or an option that I recently reviewed and liked was the Sony ZV-1 that goes for about $800, super compact, loaded with features and great image quality. Generally though, I like Canon cameras better for their amazing in-camera colors, their awesome autofocus system, and their great lens options, but every manufacturer is going to have their pros and cons. Like Sony cameras are usually going to do a lot better in low light, so it just depends on which features are most important to you. If your budget's a little higher, around $1,000, then I'd say to look into getting a nicer lens and stabilizer for your beginner camera. Lenses are just as important as camera bodies, and depending on what you shoot, I'd recommend getting something like a wide angle lens like a Tokina 11-16 for a crop sensor camera, a Canon 50mm prime, or a standard lens like a Sigma 17-50. But for stabilizers, I personally love and recommend the GlideCam HD Pro or the DJI Ronin S, and you can get both of those for around $400 to $500 and discounted off of that if you join Full-Time Filmmaker. There are pros and cons to each of these stabilizers, and you can see an in-depth comparison in the course, but basically each is going to be better for certain types of videos. Overall, I do prefer the GlideCam in more situations as it allows for the most control, but it's definitely harder to learn and harder to use. There are cheaper stabilizers out there like the Flycam Red King that you can get for around $200 and actually stacks up pretty well to the GlideCam. Again, full comparison in the course, but that's about as cheap as I would go. Point is, investing in good stabilizers stabilizers will be incredibly important to creating cinematic videos. Moving on to our next price range, for around $2,000, the Panasonic GH5S, Sony a7 III, and Canon EOS R are probably the best bang for buck quality images for the price. All very popular choices, pros and cons between each. Jumping to the next price, one of the best new cameras on the market is the Sony a7S III, one of my highest recommend cameras if you're in the Sony ecosystem. Jumping up to around the $5,000 mark, the Canon 1DX Mark II and Mark III are probably the most popular DSLRs on the market right now, and the cameras that I probably use the most for my videos. Canon recently came out with the R5 though, that can shoot 8K RAW and has pretty much all the features of the 1DX Mark III, but definitely has some serious overheating limitations, so just be aware of that. Again, pros and cons to all of these different cameras. Now, if you've outgrown the DSLR world and are looking to get into higher end cinema grade cameras, a couple popular options would be the Blackmagic Ursa Mini, the Panasonic EVA1, and the Canon C200, all sitting around $7,000, again, each with their pros and cons. And if money isn't an option and you want a top-notch cinema camera, RED cameras are the most popular choice and will run you anywhere from 20 to 50 grand once you get all the accessories. These are the cameras used on many popular Hollywood films like Guardians of the Galaxy and Pirates of the Caribbean. And RED recently came out with the Komodo, which is basically a smaller budget-friendly RED that you can get for quite a bit less if you want to get started in the RED ecosystem on a smaller budget. But again, as I've proven in my YouTube videos, you can get similarly stunning images to a RED camera just by using your smartphone if you learn how to use it well, you guys. So I always tell people it's pointless to buy expensive camera gear if you don't take the time to practice learning how to use it well and learn some of the technical and creative elements to filmmaking. And that is why I put together Full-Time Filmmaker, is to teach people skills they need in order to take advantage of the gear they already have, instead of spending thousands of dollars on better gear in hopes that it's going to all of a sudden make your videos look professional. So stop obsessing over gear. And to see a full list of all the gear I recommend, lenses, filters, lights, stabilizers, microphones, computers, hard drives, acoustic foam, backpacks, everything I own and recommend can be found by visiting kit.co/ParkerWalbeck. But enough about gear, on to our next question. A big question I get is, should I go to film school? Now, I personally never went to film school, so I don't have a firm opinion on this, but I did take some video production classes at the universities I attended, but I'd say it depends on the school. There's just pros and cons to film school, biggest con being that it takes a lot of time and money. I personally believe that on-the-job work experience is more valuable than traditional schooling when it comes to creative fields, but that's just the route I took, and that worked out for me personally. If you're going to college or plan on going, I think that's awesome, but I would highly recommend to supplement your schooling with an internship or job of some kind that can get you on-the-job training along with your studies, as I believe work experience is just as, if not more valuable than schooling. Next frequently asked question I get is, what is the success rate of people who join Full-Time Filmmaker? Now, I recently did a poll in our private Facebook group and found that over 40% of the FTF students are finding success with their video skills, and over 50% said it was too early to tell because they're still getting started, which leaves about 10% who said they were struggling to improve their skills and land work. So success rates of improving your skills is pretty high as long as you apply what I teach in the course. And it's funny because my logo of me holding up my camera has become the new symbol for when somebody in the group has improved enough to where they consider themselves as full-time filmmaker. So it's fun seeing all the different poses as people celebrate their full-time filmmakerhood. Next question, how long do I have to complete the course? How many times can I go back and rewatch it? The upfront payment is the only payment you'll make, and because it's a lifetime membership, that means you will have access to all current content and future content for life. It will never expire. You can watch it at your own pace and rewatch it as many times as you'd like. Next question, what if I don't use Canon cameras? Will the course still apply? Yes, many of our members shoot with Sony, Panasonic, Nikon, Blackmagic, and other brands of cameras, so it doesn't matter what camera gear you use, the course does still apply. Next question I get a lot, is the video market oversaturated? Is it too late to get into this? Yes and no. It is oversaturated with average photographers and videographers, but I found that once my videos stood out from the crowd, I quickly had more people emailing me wanting my services than I knew what to do with. I personally turn down most of my clients I get now and only take the funnest and highest paying clients. I only do about 5 or 6 big projects a year and spend the rest of my time creating tutorials and teaching other people how to improve their video skills. So yes, it is oversaturated with average talent, but no, it is not oversaturated with experts. So invest the time and money necessary to become an expert. Next question I get a lot, can teenagers, old folks, or women succeed in the filmmaking business? Absolutely. We have hundreds of females in the group, many succeeding on high levels. Girls can be just as successful in this field as men. We have many members who are succeeding as teenagers and many members succeeding in their 50s and 60s. There's obviously more men than women that choose to enter into the video industry and more people in their 20s and 30s than in their teens and 60s. But I've seen members in our group who are in wheelchairs who are succeeding. There's equal opportunity no matter your gender, no matter your race, no matter your age, your location. There's room for anyone to succeed as long as you're willing to put in hard-nosed work. You have no excuse to not succeed as long as you put in the work and apply what we actually teach. And last question before we end this training, if I have specific questions, will I be able to email those questions to you? Absolutely. Any question you have, you will have my personal email address that you can send me questions and I will always reply within 24 hours. And to me, that's what separates this program from so many other courses out there, is having personal access to a practicing professional who can help you overcome your stumbling blocks and shorten your learning curve. And speaking of questions, hopefully I've answered most of yours in this training. If you still have lingering questions, feel free to email me at support@fulltimefilmmaker.com and I'll try and get around to those as soon as I can. Also, if you have any other questions or doubts about whether this course is right for you, shoot me an email. I'm super accessible. Let's chat about your situation, see what we can do to help. We'd love to help you develop your skills. Also, you can follow us on Instagram at Fulltime Filmmaker and on YouTube at Parker Walbeck to keep up to date on what's going on with the Fulltime Filmmaker team. But I wish you all the best of luck in all your filmmaking endeavors. Be confident, invest in yourself, master the skills that I've taught you today, go out and market yourself, build relationships, add value first, and you should start to see improvements in your video skills and in your businesses. But that's it, folks. Thanks for watching. If you have any further questions for me, please let me know. Oh, hit the thing there. Please let me know.